Every July, in a grove of ancient redwoods in Northern California, the most powerful men in America gather in secret. They pull dark robes over their suits. They light torches. And on the shore of a black lake, beneath a towering stone owl, they set a body on fire. It is only an effigy, they will tell you, a ritual they call the cremation of care, to burn away their worries. No women are allowed to watch, no reporters, and their motto, carved into the place itself, is a kind of warning. Weaving spiders, come not here. Leave your business and your conscience at the gate. Presidents have stood in that firelight. Hoover, Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, Rockefellers, and oil men, and the industrialists who build the nation's weapons. And on one September night in 1942, among those very trees, the men who would build the atomic bomb sat down together and began to plan it. This is the story of that secret church of the American powerful, and of the man who bought his way through its gate with the loudest voice the world had ever heard. His name was William Randolph Hearst. Welcome to fortune and ruin. To sit at that fire, a man needs two things: almost unlimited money and the power to make millions of people believe whatever he tells them. Hearst had both. And like the old god of the harvest, he devoured everything he touched until he devoured himself. It began, as these stories so often do, with a father. George Hearst was a broke Missouri prospector with an almost supernatural gift for finding metal in the ground. The Comstock silver, the homestake gold, the copper of Anaconda. He became one of the largest private mine owners in America, and then a United States senator. One of the few things George owned that did not come out of the earth was a struggling San Francisco newspaper taken in payment for a gambling debt. And in 1887, his son, freshly thrown out of Harvard, asked for it. Not the mines, the newspaper. The boy understood before almost anyone that the future belonged to whoever could shout the loudest. He took the Examiner and made it scream. Then, in 1895, he marched on New York, bought a dying paper called The Journal, and declared war on the most powerful publisher in America, Joseph Pulitzer. He did not merely compete with Pulitzer, he raided him. He hired away his rival's best writers and cartoonists by the simple method of doubling their salaries. Money was the one weapon Hearst always had more of than anyone else. He would print anything that sold: crime, sex, catastrophe, outrage, manufactured fresh each morning. His rivals called it yellow journalism. Hearst called it Tuesday. At his peak, 1 in every 7 newspapers sold in America was his. 20 million people woke up every morning inside his opinion. It was the largest voice any single man had ever owned, and it bought him a key to a very particular door. The club in the Redwoods had begun in 1872 as a refuge for artists and writers, with one rule above all others: no rich men, no owners of newspapers. Then, by 1890, they made a single exception. They opened the gate for William Randolph Hearst, and the Club of Poets was never bohemian again. It became what it remains today, the clubhouse of the American ruling class. For Hearst learned the most profitable lesson of his life early: that nothing on earth sells a newspaper like a war. In February of 1898, the American battleship Maine exploded in the harbor of Havana, and 260 men died. No one knew why she sank. We now believe it was an accident, a fire in her own coal. But Hearst's papers did not wait for the truth. They blamed Spain in letters 4 inches high, with no proof at all. Remember the Maine. The circulation crossed 1 million. There is a story, the most famous thing Hearst may never have said, that his artist in Cuba wired him, "All is quiet, there will be no war," and that Hearst wired back, "You furnish the pictures, and I will furnish the war." The telegram was never found. He denied it, but the line stuck for 100 years because it felt true. The honest truth is smaller and worse. The war would probably have come without him, but no one ever made the killing sound like so much fun. He did not invent the worship of war. He simply built its cathedral and sold the tickets. It was his first sacrifice to the old god. It would not be his last. With a voice that large, he wanted the only thing it could not simply buy him: power that was his own. He won a seat in Congress, and then he lost and lost and lost. Mayor of New York twice, governor, and the prize he wanted most, the presidency, which he chased and never came close to holding. It was his own weapon that turned on him. His papers had spent years savaging President McKinley, even printing verses that openly mused about his death. And when an assassin's bullet found McKinley in 1901, the country turned on Hearst. He was burned in effigy in the streets. And the club in the Redwoods, the temple he himself had opened to money, now closed its gates against him. The Bohemians censured him and banned his papers from the Grove. 14 of his own men resigned in protest and founded a rival club they named simply The Family. The high priest of American media had been, for a season, cast out of his own church. He had begun as a firebrand, thundering against the trusts and the rich on behalf of the common man. He ended as one of the richest men alive, thundering against the poor. As one who knew him put it, he grew more conservative for the simple reason that he had more and more to conserve. To understand the Hearst hunger, look at his mother, Phoebe Apperson. Hearst took the family's mining fortune and went looking for the ancient world. She funded an expedition to Egypt that pulled 17,000 objects from the sand. It unearthed a book of medicine 3,000 years old, handed over by a peasant, as thanks for being allowed to cart away fertilizer from a village rubbish heap. And Phoebe kept a stranger secret still. In 1898, under cover of darkness, she led the first Western pilgrims across the Ottoman Empire into a walled prison city to sit at the feet of a holy prisoner and carry a new faith home to America. She was no sorceress, and there was no lodge and no seance. But the Hearsts, mother and son, were forever reaching past the ordinary world for something older and grander and half forbidden. So the son built himself a temple of his own. On a hilltop above the California coast, with his architect Julia Morgan, he began, in 1919, a castle that he would not stop building for nearly 30 years. He never finished it. 42 bedrooms, a Roman pool lined in gold. He would raise an entire wing, decide that he disliked it, and order it torn down and built again. And he filled it, like a pharaoh stocking a tomb, with the gods of dead empires, Greek gods, Roman gods, Egyptian gods, whole monastery ceilings and medieval walls, bought and shipped to him in crates. At the heart of it, he installed a Roman coffin, 17 centuries old, carved with Apollo, the 9 muses, and the goddess Minerva, whose sacred animal in the old religion was an owl, the very same owl that stood watch over his secret club in the trees. Hearst was assembling his own afterlife and the gods he meant to rule it. He called it a museum of the best things he could secure. His critics called it the grave of a man who could not stop buying. The castle was the appetite made visible. It never stopped eating, and neither did he. He was still married, but his heart and half his fortune had gone to a bright young dancer named Marion Davies, 34 years younger than he was. He built a film studio for the single purpose of making her a star. History and one famous film would call her a talentless girl he tried to buy into fame. That was a lie. She was a gifted comedian. He simply kept insisting on casting her as a queen. And then, in 1924, there was the Yacht, a birthday cruise off the coast, Marion aboard and Charlie Chaplin, and a Hollywood gossip columnist named Luella Parsons, and a film producer named Thomas Ince, who went aboard alive and came off dying. Within days, he was cremated with no autopsy. A newspaper headline that read, "Producer shot on Hearst yacht," appeared in one early edition and then vanished from every edition after. The whisper ever since is that Hearst fired that shot, that he meant it for Chaplin and hit Ince by mistake. We cannot tell you a murder happened on that boat. The official cause was a failing heart. But we can tell you that a man died, that the headline disappeared, and that the most powerful publisher in America made very sure the story disappeared with it. This was the world behind the gate. Now, let us go all the way inside it. The encampment lasts 2 weeks every summer. More than 100 camps scattered through 2,700 acres of old-growth redwood, each with its own name, its own bar, its own secrets. 2,000 of the most powerful men alive. No wives, no press, and no record kept of a single word that is spoken. It opens with the ritual, a century and a half old and performed every single year. Hooded priests in red and black, a funeral barge poled across the lake, a body called Dull Care carried to an altar at the foot of the great owl, and then the fire and the cheering as care and conscience burn away into the dark. The club says the owl is Minerva, wisdom, and the burning is only theater, a letting go. But in the summer of the year 2000, a man named Alex Jones crept through those trees with a hidden camera, filmed the entire rite, and told the world a very different story. That the owl was Moloch, the child-devouring god of the ancient East. That this was no play, but a sacrifice. The footage raced around the planet. And here is where an honest film has to stop and tell you the truth. It was not a sacrifice. There is no evidence that anyone has ever been harmed in that grove. Even the fiercest protesters at its gates call the devil worship talk exactly what it is. Nonsense. But those same protesters will tell you the real scandal was never the costume. It is the guest list and the silence. Because in that firelight, the man who owns the newspapers meets the man who owns the oil, who meets the senator, who meets the general. No aides, no reporters, no minutes. It is where one president first met the running mate who would follow him, where deals with no paper trail have shaped the country for 100 years, and where, in 1942, the weapon that would end a war and open the atomic age was quietly set in motion. So the real question about the grove was never whether powerful men worship a stone owl. Of course, they do not. The real question, the one that should keep you up at night, is quieter and far worse. What gets decided by the men who run the world in the one place where no one is ever allowed to watch? For Hearst, the lesson of 1898 never faded. War sells, fear sells. And in the 1930s, he aimed those weapons at home, running smear campaigns that helped destroy the reformer Upton Sinclair and branding the New Deal a communist plot. And then, in 1934, he went to Berlin. He met with Adolf Hitler, and afterward, he ordered his papers to treat the new regime kindly. He ran columns written by the Nazi leadership under their own names, and his wire service traded newsreels with them for money. When the loudest new voice in the world was screaming out of Germany, William Randolph Hearst handed it a megaphone and sent an invoice. To be fair to him, and we will try, he later turned against Hitler and even helped some refugees flee. He was not, in the end, a true believer in anything but himself. He was something colder, a man who would platform anyone and anything that fed the machine. Because the machine had been running on borrowed money for years. The castle, the art, the studio, the payroll of an empire, all of it fed by debt. And when the Great Depression choked off the advertising, the arithmetic came due. By 1937, the Hearst companies owed $126 million. And so the god was called to account. A court ordered his empire reorganized. His own lawyer was installed as the sole voting trustee of his stock, with the power to sell whatever he chose. The founder of the largest media empire on earth was made a salaried employee of it. He was handed a budget, and he was ordered in writing to stop building his castle. Picture it. The man whose voice woke 20 million Americans, the man who dined with dictators and sat by the fire with presidents, now asking a committee for permission to spend his own money. The god who had fed on everything was, at last, put on an allowance. They came for the collection. An auction was judged too slow, like emptying an oil tanker, one man said, with an eyedropper. So, the treasures of a lifetime, the gods and the sarcophagi, and the monastery ceilings, a $50 million hoard, were spread across the 5th floor of Gimbel's department store and sold retail to anyone who walked in. Priced, the advertisement said, from 25 cents. And the girl the world had called talentless sold her jewelry and her stocks and her bonds, $1 million of her own money, to keep him afloat. In the ruin of the loudest man in America, it was Marion Davies who quietly paid the bills. And then, at his lowest moment, a boy genius held up a mirror. In 1941, Orson Welles made a film about a media tycoon who built a palace full of treasures, chased and lost the presidency, and tried to force a talentless mistress into stardom. He called him Charles Foster Kane. No one in America had the slightest doubt who he meant. Hearst tried to strangle it in the crib. His columnists threatened the studios. His papers refused every advertisement for the film. Another studio chief offered $800,000 simply to buy the negative and burn it. The man who had spent his life deciding what America was allowed to read could not stop one single movie. It is now, routinely, called the greatest film ever made. The fictional tycoon died alone, in his empty palace of gods, whispering one word, Rosebud. What it meant no one has ever agreed. A life that enormous, reduced at the end to a single word that no one can explain. William Randolph Hearst died in 1951, at the age of 88. Not in his castle on the hill, but in a quiet house in Beverly Hills, a house that Marion Davies had bought. And at the very end, the family closed ranks. Marion, who had given him her fortune and 30 years of her life, was kept from his bedside as he died, and was not welcome at his funeral. The empire had no room, in the end, for the one person who had loved the man and not the machine. The fortune fell, but the machine did not. The Hearst Corporation survived its founder and grew, and today it is one of the largest private media empires on the planet, and the club in the Redwoods still meets every summer and burns its care and keeps its silence. The Romans had a god named Saturn, lord of wealth and time and the golden age, but the painters remembered him for one thing. To keep his throne, he devoured his own children. Hearst devoured himself to build one. He collected the gods of dead empires, married the loudest voice in America to the quietest room in it, and bought his seat at the fire where the country is quietly decided. The owl still stands in the redwoods. The powerful still gather there and burn their conscience and let no one watch. And somewhere, the machine that Hearst built still whispers into 100 million heads, deciding what you fear and what you buy and who your enemy is. Turn on the noise tonight, the outrage that sells, the fear that furnishes the war, and tell me the old gods lost. Every fortune has an ending. His was to become the very thing he worshipped. If a story this strange is worth an hour of your week, then subscribe. There is always another one, burning.